Coach Stephen, how you doing?
I'm doing very well, Dave. How are you?
Good, thank you for joining me. Um, Tell me, what are iatrogenic deaths, and why should we be concerned about them?
Well, that's a great question. And I think that might have come from the fact I wrote a Substack article about it recently. So, iatrogenic deaths, it's a Latin phrase for brought forth by the healer or harm caused by a physician. Basically, I suppose that's how we would modernize it. And it's one of those things that it's quite frightening because there has been a report by the Johns Hopkins University which, if you look at the figures for deaths in the US, for instance, it would be that medical error, basically, is what we're talking about, would be the third leading cause of death. So it's a big deal, actually. So, according to their 2016 study, and I have more up to date figures as well, 251,000 deaths were caused in the US annually by medical error. Now, I want to make sure that people don't get into this too much and think, oh, this is just like a screed against doctors and nurses, because most of them are dedicated professionals. I think they're being misled, but they're trapped in this very flawed system. And that was the thing I wanted to get across, because 251,000 deaths just in the US alone by medical error is quite frightening. I will bring in some personal stories as well, just so people understand why it's an interest to me. So just very quickly, my mother was told to lose 9 pounds in weight. She died when I was 23. And it was, in fact, she wasn't overweight. She had a 9 pound cancer growth. My father was told that he had a calcium deficiency, and a week later he was dead from cancer of the spine. So I've had two very personal misdiagnoses in the family. So it's close to my heart, actually. But when I started this way of working and dealing with real people, and that's now 15 years I've been doing that, 5 years as high carb and 10 years low carb, keto and carnivore, I personally am seeing people as well being given misinformation. But anyway, I'll get back to the sort of numbers and then maybe talk about some more close to home things. But I want to put that number in perspective. So 251,000 deaths in the US alone. If you look at drug overdoses, it's twice as many as drug overdoses, and it's 6 times as many as motor vehicle, accidents. So it is a big deal. And we're not talking about a surgeon having a slip of a scalpel. We're talking about some really strange and interesting facts when you look at it. So, for instance, adverse drug reactions to properly prescribed medications. Now, just that phrase alone, properly prescribed, properly dosed prescriptions, is over 100,000. Now, that would make just that one thing the fourth leading cause, actually. So it isn't something that we could just overlook, and it can be acted upon. There are practical things in the Substack that I talk about. Now, I suppose the biggest problem is these things aren't logged properly. So most people don't think that medical error is really that much of a problem. So you don't see, oops, my bad, on the CDC's official list of mortality causes. You don't even see medical error as a thing. And that's because it lacks what's called an International Classification of Disease code. So that is one of the things we need to do. We need to actually get it coded. And this isn't just something that's happened as a one-off. It isn't Johns Hopkins looked at these figures in 1 year and it was really bad. So there's a thing called the CDC Wonder data, which is the wide-ranging online data for epidemiological research database. And that looks at medical misadventure. And allegedly it declined between 1999 and 2020, but then it went up. And the increase is quite sharp. So iatrogenic error related mortality is the thing that they call it. That actually increased by 17% between 2015 and 2020. And it was even worse for people over 65. So that went up by 18%. So with all these modern wonder drugs and all the money that's put into the healthcare system, it isn't helping. In fact, things are going backwards. And I think everybody sort of knows that it's the first time ever in modern recorded history where parents are likely to live less long than their children. the estimated lifespan is now actually getting worse rather than better. So when you look at costs, and that's one of the things that they did, they looked at the estimated cost of this issue, and it was deemed to be costing the economy about $20 billion. And actually, they said an upper limit is maybe this, that's an annual amount, $45 billion. And we get the word billion talked about ever such a lot in healthcare and big pharma and government policy. And I don't think people realise the difference between a million and a billion. So if you look at the second hand on your watch and you counted it, I'm old enough to remember this, and you could count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, as it went round. If you counted it a million times, so a million seconds, that would take you 11 days. You just staring at your watch, counting up to a million. That would take 11 days. If you counted to a billion, it would take you 31 years. Right. So the scale of difference between billion and million is amazing. So we're talking 20 billion to maybe 45 billion is costing the US annually. So you would imagine that someone would want to get hold of that. And I know that is a big issue at the moment where, got the Doge looking at money being misspent. I mean, that's quite a big chunk of change. So what could we do? So, medical errors, actually half of them happen at the prescribing stage. So that's a lot. And there are deaths by sort of adverse drug reactions where we're not looking at like polypharmacy, where there's one drug and another drug and another drug. So we've got a systemic problem, really. So let me just sort of come back to reality and how things are reported. And I can give you some very low level things that aren't reported because they've happened to me with people that have been doing consultations. Only yesterday, I had somebody, they were crying their eyes out because they'd spoken to their doctor and they were basically the fear of whatever had been put into them. And it was because they looked at their EGFR, their estimated glomerular filtration rate, the function of the kidney, basically. Now, this person for 4 years has really cured so many things with this way of eating. They used to be vegetarian, that terrible thyroid issue, and they resolved all that. And we knew that from the bloods, that the thyroid issues are gone, the antibodies have gone down, the TSH, T3, T4, all great. And most importantly, the symptoms. She'd lost all the fatigue, all the weight problems, all the heat problems. But anyway, so the physician says, there is one worrying thing, and that is your GFR, the function rate of your kidney, has gone down, and it's gone from 90 down to 60. And we need to send you to a nephrologist, and you could be looking at this sort of decline, you could be looking at a transplant. Now, what I said to the client before we went any further is the little e stands for estimated. And that's exactly what it is. It's estimated based on what's called creatinine, which is the waste product protein metabolism. And when that number goes up, the calculation will mean that proportionally your GFR goes down. They're just assuming that your kidney isn't functioning that well because this is a higher number. And there should be another test called the cystatin C test, which isn't affected by dietary protein and muscle mass and other things. It's an actual direct measurement. So in my book, I showed her my book and a real story from a client previously. I'll just read it if you don't mind. This was what she said. Big thank you. Right at the start of this challenge, I asked a query regarding my kidney function based on my EGFR results. Doctors were freaking out and wanting to send me to a nephrologist. Stephen, you took this in your stride and you advised me to get a cystatin C test which is not affected by dietary protein intake, and none of my doctors had recommended it. I did just that and received the results. My standard EGFR was showing at 67, but the cystatin C test showed it to be 128. Right, so you've gone from what the NHS call chronic kidney disease stage 2 to beyond brilliant. And that is a common thing. Now, what I'm saying, that one in the book and the one I spoke to yesterday, she's going off to get a cystatin C test. I've never seen a cystatin C test on someone that hasn't had a transplant. That's the only confounder when we look at those numbers. But for the majority of people, 99.9%, they get their cystatin C test and immediately they're not deemed to have a kidney function problem. So both of those are iatrogenic errors, aren't they? They're physicians put in, the fear amongst these people. She was crying, and at the end, she started crying a different way with relief that she's going to get this other test, which is much more definitive. Now, the interesting thing is, the only reason I've ever seen the woke thing happening, being a good thing, is in this area, because the EGFR is also affected by a racist factor. This is what they said in 2021. Nothing to do with me, by the way. I think we should change it because the cystatin C is much more reliable. But also, what happens, and I said it to the lady yesterday, if you did tick the box that you were African American, they would have multiplied that filtration rate up by about, by a factor of 1.4, 1.6, and you wouldn't have had a problem, because they believe that every African American has got more muscle. They're more likely to have a higher range, which shows the estimation is riddled with inconsistencies, whereas the cystatin C is much more reliable. So that group of people also want the cystatin C brought in, but they're saying to take the racist factor out. Well, there is some biological reasons for that, but I think it's just happenstance that is also good, because the EGFR is rubbish anyway, and we should be using cystatin C, and we certainly shouldn't be using that number to scare people into thinking that their health is going the wrong way.
It's quite scary when you think it's so easy for someone to be pushed down the road of dialysis or transplant or something like that based on a number which is estimated.
Yeah, oh yeah, it's absolutely frightening. I mean, that's the reason I wrote the book, and this isn't to plug the book. It's that it's actually telling the viewer why I'm interested in this. Is I see this all the time when you're doing bloods and they're misinterpreted, and it isn't just kidney. It's the HbA1c is unreliable, and we're now looking at the labs doing what's called a HbA1c, which is adjusted. That's a real thing as well, looking at the lifespan of red blood cells. But anyway, let's get back to this iatrogenic problem. So the ICD code is, it's a huge gap. The CDC need to have a code for medical error. Once they do that, then we can start actually addressing these problems. I mean, they've literally got the code X21 is contact with a venomous spider. In my Substack, I did said V95.43, false landing of spacecraft injuring the occupant. But there is no code for a fatal dosage miscalculation, for instance. So I think it's interesting. So I just mentioned underreporting. So there has been a look at the underreporting, and some people claim it could be, less than 10% of these medical errors are actually reported. So we're talking 251,000 are reported. Well, what about the ones that aren't? And like I say, there's a couple of low-level stories about the EGFR there, which could have led to a problem. But luckily, those people did something. And without this reporting system, so I report this back and they report it back to the physician or the nephrologist or endocrinologist, nothing seems to happen. This thing about cystatin C doesn't seem to be getting enough traction. There was a joint commission which said they wanted to look at root cause analysis, for these major errors. The big thing they came up with is exactly the same thing: create a code for catastrophe. The CDC really need to do this. The other thing is, and this came up again with a different success story on my YouTube channel, is this one size fits all approach. And that is a big problem. So we're not looking at nutrition. We're not looking at lifestyle, whether you're exercise or not. It's a tick box thing. You've got fatigue, you've got this, unexplained weight gain, here's some bloods. Oh, wow, okay, it's these medications. And then that's frightening as well. And that's not being addressed either. So I did this success story with Jessica Roman. I don't know if you know, but she has been on Chafee's show. Everyone's all over it now because everyone's pushing for a case study. So this one size fits all, just to give you what happened with her, for instance, her daughter at 2 weeks old was diagnosed with MMIHS, which is a sort of soft tissue disease. And there's only 450 cases. Now, remember, it's been reported. So at 2 weeks old, she was given this diagnosis, and there's not a good prognosis. There's a strong chance that her daughter wouldn't live for very long, and she was getting constipation. She had 16 surgeries. This is on a 2 week 2-year-old baby. She went through a series of surgeries, and the mother was just getting fed up. And she went and gave her daughter a carnivore diet. And now, 6 years later, the daughter can play for 5 hours, and it's great. Now, the point I'm going to make is I went to ChatGPT and I put the condition in and said, what can be done? I'm just interested in this one size fits all. And ChatGPT, I asked, I'm very good at interrogating it. I use the deep research thing. And what is the standard duty of care? What's the procedure? What would the NHS recommend? And it's just this one size fits all thing. So I said to it, and this is where I find this quite frightening. Well, actually, I'm speaking to a person called Jessica Roman, and she seems to have been able to do things with diet. Now, ChatGPT had previously said categorically, diet does not affect it. It actually said that. When I put her name in, Jessica Roman, ChatGPT knew all about her, knew she'd been on Chafee's program, knew about the case study, and knew that she had had remarkable results. But it's still been hidden. Now, I just mentioned I'm in this research part of ChatGPT and teaching it other things and giving it sort of a memory database. And you're able to see it thinking. And it actually said, before I give any advice, I must remember to promote a balanced diet. It actually said that not in its answer, but as it was churning away.
Yeah,
you
can see it kind of, it's almost talking to itself, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's an interesting thing. If you do use it, I definitely would plug into the deep research thing. So it knows the story. It knew there was a possibility, but it didn't do that unless I prompted it and prompting it. So technology could be a big key here. And another simple thing we could do is computerized provider order entry. It's a system called CPOE. Now, when they've used that, which is basically taking the prescription pad and the handwriting out of the system and just logging it, and I've got a citation for the study on this, it eliminated 50% of mistakes. So it eliminated, obviously, illegible handwriting. It flagged potential drug interactions, and it ensured there was a correct dose. Well, people writing a prescription. I mean, when I did my obesity and diabetes qualification, I had to learn all the medications. And that's just a small, select few, quite a lot really, and for me, but, out of all the pharmacological solutions, I had to learn them back to front, inside out. And, imagine if you're a general practitioner, I'm a specialty practitioner, imagine if you're a general, you've just got all of that, and you should be using electronic, prescription writing, really. And that's the other thing. So we get into polypharmacy. One of my clients that I consulted with over a different issue, strangely enough, was one of the top people in America dealing with exactly that, with drugs and polypharmacy. And he was saying, in care homes.
So sorry to interrupt.
Yeah,
Polypharmacy is like multiple drugs and the
multiple drugs.
interactions.
Yes, yeah. Sorry. He was saying in the care homes, at least the average was 9 medications per patient in the care homes. At least that was the average. So there were people on like 18 medications. So we need to be looking at, and his job was to do comprehensive reviews, medication reviews, and try to de-prescribe, and get rid of those unnecessary medications. Some medications, and I learned this with my mother. I mean, before I was doing this job, I was wise to it, that sometimes they give like 1, 2, 3 prescriptions, and the fourth one is to mitigate the side effects of the first one, which is terrible. So, especially with the older generation. So the whole thing basically is from top to bottom a complete disaster. We should be looking at, firstly, simple things like the CDC should have a code for medical error. We should definitely have more of the electronic prescription writing, I think, across the board. And I don't see why America, for instance, couldn't be the leaders in that. They seem to have the tech in place to do it. And we also need to look at the underreporting and a little bit more honesty. Now, as I said, this is not a screed against doctors or health professionals. This is looking at the thing and saying, well, what can we do? And there's lots that we can do. The other thing is to take out the blame. So if you make a mistake, they shouldn't be so scared to report it. They shouldn't be chastised. There's so many, amazing things in place for other areas of public life. where you can make mistakes, but you're given lots of help and support. So, for instance, if you're a pilot, again, we use America, like Delta recently, had to arrest one of their pilots. But the checks and the safety checks, because this pilot was, a little bit over the limit on alcohol, was amazing. So they, every time a pilot checks in, there's lots of security footage. There's also, boots on the ground, basically looking for any behaviour, not just from patients, but also from cabin crew. And they just picked up on a guy recently who went, it was a pilot, and they could see it on the CCTV. The people could see that he went to check in, and then he changed his mind and went. They followed him on the CCTV. He went, meters and meters, if not miles away, to a toilet to do something. They timed how long he was in the toilet. So obviously he got rid of something from his bag, and it was a bottle of vodka. And then he went back. Now, the point being, there was all these checks, and they stopped him and they arrested him. But when they interviewed him, it wasn't, that's it, you're like going to lose your license and that. We're going to put you into rehab. There's a thing called HIMSS, which is a thing, which is a motivational thing to get people back and to sort out their cravings. He wasn't chastised. He lost a lot of, his ability to fly for a long period of time. But the idea was to rehab him and get him back into flying, because, he's got lots of experience and all that sort of stuff. What planes, £330 million worth of kit, lots of passengers. You want good people, but he just had a problem. Like I say, he wasn't drunk. He was, it was just marginally over the limit. So if we can do that with pilots, if we can say that, why don't we do that with doctors? Why don't we say, if you've made a problem, you prescribed, it correctly. I mean, that's the thing. You prescribed correctly. The dosage is correct, but maybe there's an interaction that wasn't factored in. You don't want that person losing their license. You want that person to learn from that, go forward, and not be, have a mark against them forever. And I think that's the thing. If you did these things, firstly, you take the human error out of it. So if you use the computer entry, order entry, that would take that problem out. That's the first thing. The CDC, if there are errors, you've got to know about them, so you can then reverse engineer to find out, well, where was the problem? Well, I'm not suggesting they're sweeping it under the carpet, but I'm going to use that analogy or that metaphor. If they're sweeping it under the carpet and not even registering it, you can never improve it. It's as simple as that. You've got to be able to say, what is the problem and where did it happen? How are we going to stop that happening again? And I don't think there's anything wrong with saying that the third leading cause of death is medical error, because that's the facts. That's from studies. That's, all of this is referenced. It isn't just from one or two reports. I think there's 9 different references in the article I wrote. And I was really surprised. And then when I thought about my own practice, I've encountered it. So I've encountered it in my own life with both my parents. So I think it's probably bigger than we realise. And I don't think anyone person is to blame. I don't think a profession is to blame. I just think it's a systemic issue that we need to look at. CDC need to get into it, and literally everybody needs to take it on board and be honest.
Right. So if we just talk about the ICD code for the moment, the I being international. So does that mean that this is a problem globally?
Well, yes, because that goes to the CDC, and the CDC, the Centre of Disease Control, is universal. So we need to look at it across the entire sort of world, really. But if we just did it in America for a start, just started it there, that would be handy, wouldn't it? Just get it in one place.
Yeah, I mean, basically what I was getting at was more along the lines of, so if this is such a massive problem in America, it's probably also a massive problem everywhere else, right?
Oh yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely, yes, absolutely. And it's one of those things that we should just be doing it. We should just, across the world. I mean, the first country that starts to say, well, we're going to start our own sort of unofficial recording of this because we want to reduce the preventable medical errors killing people, which is a grim reality to use that phrase. But once one country does it, maybe everyone will take it on board because they'll see improvements.
Yeah, and you said the number is like 251,000, and it's likely higher than that. And I would
Mm.
imagine, yeah, it probably is because there is no code, so they've had to do so much specific investigation to work out that number in the first place. They've probably missed a lot.
Yeah, and I think even that report that said 251,000 put in the report that it's probably more like 440,000. These aren't numbers I'm plucking out there. These are the numbers that the peer reviewed analysis estimated. So they probably started to look into it and ended up talking to people, boots on the ground, and yeah, these sort of anecdotes. Just me, I'm just one person, so I can count in my family, my mother, my father, my nephew I can think of, even me, and then also people I've encountered online during consultations. So it isn't rare. It's actually quite common.
Yeah. So during this analysis, or as part of this analysis, did they actually put forward the proposal that we should have this, and did they note anything about these are roadblocks to doing it, or?
Yeah, I mean, the citations I use, 3 and 4, it actually said in the study, some analyses accounting for the systemic underreporting on death certificates push this estimate even higher to a terrifying 440,000 annual deaths. I've got it in front of me. And they said that one of the biggest reasons is the CDC's official list of mortality causes is that the medical error lacks a specific international classification of disease code. So that's a different citation. The researchers relied on retrospective studies and chart reviews, leading to a debate over the exact numbers, though even conservative estimates are alarming. Critics argued that the methodology is flawed, but even low-end estimates from other countries suggest tens of thousands of preventable deaths annually, a far cry from zero, which is because we have no code, they assume it's zero. So,
Mm,
it's been looked at more than
yeah,
once, and like you say, across countries and stuff. And all those links are in the Substack if people want to
yeah.
read this.
Just the interesting thing for me is just I just wonder why they don't just go, okay, we need to do something about this. We need to start recording this. Like, would they? Do you think there'd be pushback? I can't imagine that would the doctors go on strike, or the doctors would be pushing back against this, or would it be more likely industry wouldn't like the idea of, you know, recording the fact that polypharmacy could be a problem sometimes?
I can't speak for other people. My guess, there was a wry smile when you said maybe the industry. I mean, the pharmaceutical company do have previous in this area, don't they, where they don't like to admit that things aren't as hunky dory as they would wish. And I think that it might be public trust. I mean, that would be the excuse they'd use, that we need to trust our health system. But I think, again, at ground level, people don't. And I think the trust of doctors, the mainstream media, pharmaceutical companies is at an all-time low. And I mean, they're happy to front up about things like the opioid crisis. Well, I mean, these numbers, 251,000 is double the problems with opioids. So they can definitely, say, oh, this is our bad, the overprescribing of opioids. But I think it's so systemic and so wide ranging. It's literally saying the whole system is flawed, which it is. That's what I'm saying. And I think it's just too big a leap. But the more pressure we put on for these things to happen, I don't understand. This is a personal opinion. I don't understand why they don't use the computerized order entry system straight away, because that would immediately make them look better. I
For
just don't get
prescriptions?
first prescriptions. I
Mm.
don't. So I don't understand. And I feel if we can't get the CDC to put a code up, well, let's at least clear up the prescriptions part of it, which is about 100,000 deaths annually in the US. So that's a huge chunk. That's reversing the problem by potentially, like I say, 50%. And they won't seem to do it. I think there is this fear of losing public trust, and I think they're just not transparent about what's going on. Also, it's the old a can of worms. Are they going to open a can of worms? Because if they start to be honest, is that number going to go up beyond the estimated top limit of 440,000 and be even more frightening?
There's probably also an element of, like, why do we have to change? This has always worked for us before. Why do we have to do something different? You're trying to make, you're trying to watch us or something like that.
Well, yeah, there's definitely going to be that. I mean, a lot of people don't like change, but it's not working, and I think that's the thing. They've got to admit it's not working, and that's just such a big ask for the pharmaceutical industry. They just don't do it. So, and then you'll also get into sort of politics as well, because they will find that there's geographical hotspots, because that's another thing where certain states are much, much worse than others. That's what was found in the study. Like Mississippi had one of the highest rates. It was something, the mortality rate was much higher than, say, Massachusetts, almost double the amount of medical error there. So then what's going to happen there? I don't really know the American system as well as I'd like, but obviously the people in charge of that area are going to come under scrutiny. So politically, it's a bit of a hot spot. And then you're also going to find, I would imagine, that you would have economics being part of it. I would imagine that the medical error is worse in certain populations where there's low income, and then you've got another can of worms. Is it in Britain we call it a postcode lottery. So you have a postcode, you have a zip code, we have a postcode, and some postcodes have much better services than others. And I was born on a council estate, the lowest of the low. So I was I wasn't in accommodation we owned. My mum rented the property. It was notorious, my area, for being the worst. When they did the league tables for schools, my school was right slap bang at the bottom as the worst performing. And I would imagine, you see, that the whole thing opens up that political problem of, low income, working class, and we get the worst healthcare. And these are realities that the people at the top, the elite, don't want to have pointed out too much, because I can bet you bottom dollar that every politician in the UK would be in an area where the system isn't that bad, or they opt out and use private. And that's another thing that is a bit of a bugbear of mine, is politicians are always championing the NHS here in the UK, but when push comes to shove, they don't use it. I mean, they just go for private healthcare. And many, many years ago, when I was a bit more of a political animal, I actually went to see my member of parliament, went to the Houses of Parliament and had tea, and sat with him, and gave him a couple of my ideas. And one was common sense about finance, but another one was about healthcare. And this was before I did this job, actually. And I said, shouldn't we just make it an absolute nailed on rule that anyone that is a member of parliament has to use the NHS and cannot use the private healthcare system? And he just went, well, that goes against human rights, freedom. Even then, they were talking about that. When it suits them, they love it. They love, freedom of speech and human rights.
Yeah, it's the same. It's the same in Australia with politicians and their pension schemes. They're always changing the rules for the common person, but they've got their own pension schemes where they don't have to worry about those rules, and they would never go to the common man's system.
No.
Yeah. So I guess on an individual level, though, really one of the most important things for us to do is stay healthy. And if we are taking drugs, we need to make sure that we're not taking drugs that are going to interact badly with each other, right?
Oh, yeah. And I think, the answer to this is to be led from the bottom up, the grassroots. We need to take our own health, more seriously. We need to understand the terms that are used. We need to understand, the medications that are prescribed. We need to understand that when you're told something has a 50% more chance of reducing heart disease, we need to know that that is an absolute risk of maybe 1%, whereas the way that they manipulate the figures. So people need to understand the difference between relative risk and absolute risk. That's the first thing. So when we talk about, say, statins, for instance, the risk reduction from taking a statin is vastly exaggerated because they use relative risk rather than absolute risk, and the unrecognised harms or under-recognised harms of these things. So when you look at patients who take a statin, for instance, 29% of patients report muscle-related issues. Right? Well, that's huge. That's a third of people take, but we're still led to believe that the side effects aren't that great on statins. That's coming from the pharmaceutical companies. But again, in my own family, my father-in-law was prescribed statins and immediately had the well-known side effects. He had muscular pain, but he also had memory loss. And as soon as he went back to the doctor, well done to the doctor, took him off, and that was great. But then years later, the same doctor put him back on because he had a heart issue, brought on by some other thing, but we won't get into that because we'll get taken off YouTube. And put straight back on the statin, and straight away the memory problems happened again. So my father-in-law didn't want to listen to me because I don't have a white coat. Yeah, I have an honours degree in physiology and health sciences, and do the obesity and diabetes, but that's nothing because this person works at a hospital or they work in a pharmacy, and that's the person they're going to listen to, even over their own experience. I kept saying, well, twice now you've had this prescription medication and it has not helped you. You've had memory problems and you've had muscle problems. Oh, yeah, but they know what they're doing. And I'm like, well, actually, the proof of the pudding is they don't, because the second time the same things happened. So they're not learning from their mistakes. And sorry to bring it full circle, but that's the whole point. You've got to learn from your own mistakes. It's no good implementing this system, a system which I think is primed for overprescription. That's another thing. There's way too many medications when there's other interventions we could do. You've got to admit your mistakes and then do something about it. So even if the CDC do say, right, here's a code, and even if they do go over to a computerized order entry system, they've still got to front up and say, right, now we need to do something about it. We need to, move forward, and we need to listen to patients more. Like I say, when I speak to people, they are dreading going to the doctor, dreading going to the hospital because they're not listened to. And if they've researched something, and I love the mug you've got, for instance, that says, don't mix up your medical degree with my critical thinking, right? That's the thing, right? To me, it's a no-brainer. If you give someone something and they get muscle pain and memory loss, and you take them off and muscle pain and memory loss goes, that isn't a good medication for you. So why would you do it again? You've got to learn. All right, I'm human. We all make mistakes. So that's accepted. But if we can minimize human error and then be brave enough to say, yeah, I made a mistake there, let's do it right this time, which is a human nature thing. This isn't, a system thing. Then we are going to get somewhere.
Yeah. It's 3-4 years ago, I never thought I would be talking about this kind of thing, but it's so interesting, and it's like there's so many complicated areas of it, and it's just really interesting to analyze it all and look at what's wrong with it, and how it could run much better. It really does. When you look at it from a business eye, it does really feel like it's kind of running a little bit. If a management consultant came in, not that management consultants are that good, but if a management consultant came in and looked at the medical system as a whole, they would go, no, we've got to do something with this.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's not about abandoning medications that people see are valuable or helpful, but it is about firstly, analyzing the patient. I mean, genetic testing can come in as well. So you could look at that. You could bring in technology in different ways. But it is a cultural shift. That's the thing that I think, it's going to be more transparent, and you're going to have more shared decision making. So the patient is important in this. I mean, the clinical presentation of a person, again, sorry to be boring about my book. The reason I wrote this book is because clinical presentation is coming out of the equation. How you look, how you feel, how you perceive what's going on with your treatment doesn't seem to be important anymore. And it's just numbers. And I know that behind the scenes, they want to take doctors and nurses out of this equation as well. So eventually you can just use AI and, have a medication popped out at the bottom of a vending machine or something. And I'm not joking about that. I really think they want to get people out of the system as much as possible. I don't think that is a good thing to do. I think we still need that. And this is where human beings interacting with each other, that can't be bettered by AI, certainly not at the moment. So we need to get into that, where doctors actually realize that improving their performance isn't actually a way of getting rid of them. It's a way of making them more valuable, making the
Yeah,
nurses more valuable.
they become indispensable then.
That's exactly it. Yes,
Mm.
because they're part of a process, transparent decision sharing with patients, where the patients will go, oh, you can't get rid of the doctor because I answered a question, but because of his knowledge of me, he asked a question that the AI would never ask. You know?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's like any other industry. If you're just painting by numbers, then you're replaceable at any point,
Yeah,
but when you actually know the patients, when you're actually assessing every patient one on one on the, how they're actually presenting, then yeah, nothing can replace you.
yeah. And it isn't doctors. I'm not saying doctors are bad. I'm saying these professional people are sadly involved in a convoluted, poorly designed system that sets you up to fail. And
Mm.
that's a problem
Yeah,
because and
yeah,
that
it's the
time
system.
pressure and everything stress. Yes, it's the system.
Mm. Yeah. So how can people get a hold of your Substack?
Well, hopefully you'll put a link in the description.
Mm.
So the web address, in case you'd like to just hear it, is the UK Carnivore
Right.
.substack.com. It's just a collection of articles. I publish maybe 3 a week. I mean, this one was published 19th of July. The Doctor Will or Maybe Kill You Now is what it's called. There's a bit of humor added to it. There's always references. The idea of it is a resource. So if you've got people that are skeptical, and maybe you could do something like this yourself, Dave, or use my Substack. If you've got people that are unsure about carnivore or unsure about how to talk to their friends or relatives. The idea is it's written in a way it's quite funny, bit basic with some of the science, and then there's you can delve in a bit more with links to references and stuff like that, and you know. So that's how you can get me, or you can email me if you've got personal questions, very similar to your one, zero carb, all spelt out, coach at gmail.com. The UK Carnivore is my website, and also I'm on YouTube, and yeah, I'm pretty much everywhere. My book, if you want to know that's quite handy. The Guide to Blood Tests in the context of low carb, keto, and carnivore. And that goes through really basics. It teaches you about what a blood test is, what's good about it, and then as you get through the book, it gets into all the normal ones that people talk about, which are not correctly interpreted in this way of eating. So low T3 is not a pathology, it's a physiological adaptation. It talks about why that is, the EGFR, why that is a terrible marker, so that's kidney function, blood glucose management, why the HbA1c is unreliable, and proof of, solid proof that that is unreliable. It talks about that. It talks about iron, how we misinterpret ferritin, how we misinterpret uric acid. The list is endless. I'm trying to think of a few more that are sort of big hitters, but basically it goes through all of that in really plain English.
Awesome. Well, I'll link to all those in the show notes, and specifically also to I'll link to the Substack, but also specifically to this article on the Substack that we've been talking about.
Oh, thank you. Yeah.
Um, yeah, Coach Stephen, thank you so much for coming on and sharing your experience. Really learned a lot, and I've got a new word now, iatrogenic. Thank you so
Yes.
much.
That's okay. No, it's great to have a chat with you, and I'm loving what you're doing. You work so hard. You're very close to 100,000 subscribers, so I think you need to get people subscribing to your channel and liking, hopefully coming over to mine as well. I love how you think. I mean, I think we're like-minded in that we just won't take what everyone else is saying. We look at things ourselves. I mean, I just noticed you were talking about white labeling of supplements and your own research. Never heard anyone talking about it. It's always bothered me, to be honest, that people do that. So I think that's why you're successful, because you're open-minded and you work hard and you think for yourself. And that's the biggest thing I say to people out there is you've got to think for yourself. You really have, even what we're saying. And that's why I put all the references in. You can listen to what I say and say, well, that all makes sense. And it is quite frightening. And you can think of your own personal anecdotes where you've encountered sort of medical error, however you want to view it, whether it's doctors, nurses, the system, you know, just we've got to get it better. We've got to look after each other. And it is a systemic problem. And you can take control and make a difference. And you can just keep spreading the word to other people and help them to get healthy. And Dave, you're just such a big part of that. It's incredible.